Hi, I'm Michelle Smart. I'm an enrolled agent, and I'm here to give you the latest updates on the ERC. And there is a lot happening. So, June the 20th, we know that the IRS came out with a news bulletin that the moratorium would continue, and that Werfel, who is the commissioner of the IRS, thought that 60 to 70% of the claims for ERC were fraudulent. Now, what rippled through the accounting community online was that some people agreed that that could be the case, but the accountants who really are knee deep in the ERC claims reminded the other accountants, that these 941X forms that are used to claim the ERC do not indicate, they don't tell you how they qualified. In other words, that was never required. So it's not possible, when Werfel made this claim, that 60 to 70% of these claims were fraudulent. There's 1.4 million unprocessed claims, and the 941X forms do not show how you qualify unless you qualified as a recovery startup business, and I would say that's a small percentage. So qualifying by reduction in gross receipts has to be a quarterly calculation. They don't have that information in any tax returns. It's not possible. So I would say that 60 to 70% was strictly a projection by the commissioner of the IRS. And I just think this guy needs to be fired. How is it that he's taken into his hands to do this moratorium for more than 9 months without any end in sight, and then kicking it back to Congress with this news release saying he wants Congress to decide when the moratorium should end? So no one's talking about the moratorium ending. Meanwhile, a Freedom of Information Act has been filed against the IRS, asking them to prove where they came up with the 60 to 70%. And now all the accounts that I'm reading from are all pretty much in agreement, realizing that they could have not come up with this number in any possible way, reasonable way. And this guy has just made a mess of the whole thing. Now, on top of that, I have my ears to the ground about any potential class action lawsuits against the IRS for not sending out these refunds. It is their job to process them. Some of the talk has been about focusing in on the paid tax preparer on the 941X form. This is something should have been done 3 years ago, in my opinion. But if you look at your 941X form, there is a section for paid preparer and a PTIN, which is the preparer identification number. The IRS could pick up those numbers and they could find out if this is a legitimate licensed tax return preparer. They should be signing with a PTIN. That does not mean they are licensed as an enrolled agent, a CPA, or an attorney, but the IRS will know because that PTIN is issued from the IRS. So there is some talk of that. But what I'm just seeing is the IRS is broken. They're being hit with lawsuits. We've talked about the APA and the violation of that act. And what that means essentially is that the IRS has taken it into its own hands to define the law from the CARES Act. So in addition to that, we have had this very interesting Supreme Court decision that just came out. So the Supreme Court is overturning the Chevron decision, curtailing the federal agency's power, and a major change. What does that really mean? When the power is given over to some agency to administer a law, that agency does not really have the authority to define that law any further than how it was written. So this comes back around, this overturning of the Chevron doctrine has an effect on the ERC processing, because again, it's saying the IRS, or how we could interpret this, is the IRS is an agency of the US government, and they have been given this CARES Act law, and they have been challenged with how they have proceeded to administer that. These are what some of the lawsuits are going after. So when we're talking about this overturning of the Chevron, the proponents of the doctrine have argued that the agencies have the expertise and experience to address the gaps in the laws enacted by Congress, especially when it comes to administering programs that have broad swaths of the population. But overturning Chevron means that it's taken the power away from agencies such as the IRS to narrowly define the law, as which has already been a complaint. So I'll put a link to this article about the Supreme Court overturning the Chevron decision, and just think of this in terms of what is going on with the IRS and the complaints against the IRS for narrowly defining the ERC and what qualifies for the ERC, especially with the 2021-20 and 2021-49, where they have narrowly defined the ERC. I think this continues to put a lot of pressure on the. I think they are failing miserably. There are many refunds that have not gone out, not just the ERC refunds. There are other lawsuits where they have been required. The IRS has had Freedom of Information Act filed against them, asking in the middle of court cases for them to come up with documents, and they are failing to do that. So it just seems like failure all around on other areas, trying to call them, trying to do business with them. In other words, if they were a regular business, they would be out of business, because nobody is going to put up with that really for service. It's just, things are not going well at the IRS, in my opinion, and it's time for Werfel to go, because this needs to end. I just feel like people have their own opinion of the ERC, whether they like it or they don't. It's a law. It's a legitimate law, and you don't have the right to go in there and shut it down, which is essentially what he's done. The clock has run out for 2020, so that deadline happened about 6 months, 7 months after this moratorium was enacted, and it just scared everybody. So everybody who could have qualified for the ERC just did not file for it. And now the clock continues to run as the moratorium has no end in sight, and it's just forcing people to not want to file, because they are afraid that it's going to be very difficult. They're going to be audited, and they're just opening up Pandora's box. So I just feel like the IRS and Werfel have taken it upon themselves to decide to not follow the law. This is a law. This is a refund. How can you sit on this for more than 9 months, and these small businesses are waiting for refunds? So like I said, I have my ear to the ground about potential class action lawsuits against the IRS, but I think this is going so terribly that something is going to have to crack at the IRS. So far, we don't know what that is. It just seems like it's broken. Just one other piece of information that I picked up in was that we had these big mills, and they were running a lot of ERC claims through, and this became a problem. It was not handled well by the IRS. The IRS was asked by the AICPA and all of us professional tax return preparers to do something about it, which they could have done, tracing the PTINs, which are the preparer tax identification numbers that are in the paid preparer section of the 941X. They could have traced those to see if these were licensed individuals or licensed groups that were preparing these forms. They could have stopped the mills then, but they didn't do that. So now everybody is in the same boat, and we're all waiting. But one thing that I found out is that if they have identified somebody as inappropriate preparer who has filed false claims and so forth, they are somehow not allowed to look up all of the other clients that were who they prepared these ERC claims for. So in other words, if they had a mill and they identified the mill, they've got a PTIN number, they are not allowed to go back and find all of the other people who had their ERC filed by this same person or company. So that was an interesting thought. I'll try to get more information on that. So I will keep you updated as much as information I can get. There are a lot of lawsuits happening, and I think this pressure is just building up. Either Werfel's got to go, he's the commissioner of the IRS, or something's got to change. This is the law. I do feel like, we had the PPP come out and everyone qualified and everyone got that. It was an easy qualifier. It just had to be that you were worried about your business. And then we had the EIDL loan, which again, that was a complete catastrophe, because they gave loans based out on gross income and not on anyone's ability to repay it. So a lot of people cannot repay their EIDL loans. And now we're coming down to the ERC, and it seems like they want the ERC to pay the price. The people who have filed for ERC to pay the price for this sort of very quickly put into law CARES Act that wasn't completely and perfectly defined. So it was an emergency situation that this came out, but now it's like ERC people who, this is a law, it's a legitimate credit, and we're all paying the price right now. So thanks for watching. This is Michelle Smart. I'm an enrolled agent. Please click like so that more people who are out there and worried about getting their ERC refund can subscribe and follow. Thanks again.